Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the fourth day of Quality Week 2021, organized by the Colombo Quality Camp. We are really excited to have you all here today. So before I hand over the session to our speakers, I would like to extend a special welcome to our speakers for today, Nilushi Vikramasuriya and Masid Moraes. Nilushi Vikramasuriya is a senior business consultant at Asiata Digital Labs with 16 years of industry experience working on projects in multiple domains with local and international exposure in the software industry. She's experienced in leading and mentoring business analysts with the passion to foster BA best practices. So next, I would like to introduce our second speaker for today, Masid Moraes. He's a principal architect, software engineering at Asiata Digital Labs. He's a regionally exposed tech professional with 16 years of experience in executing and managing software design and development projects with the exposure to fintech, banking, and digital transformation domains. So in this evening, our speakers will be walking us through on non-functional requirements, which is a fortress around functional requirements. So without any further ado, I would like to hand over the session to Nilushi. Over to you, Nilushi.
Thank you. Thank you and good evening, everyone. Yahoo, 3 billion accounts of account information accessed by hacking group. Alibaba.com, 1.1 billion pieces of user data scraped by an affiliate marketing. 700 million users worth of data posted on a dark web forum. Facebook, 533 million users worth of data, account information exposed to the public. And 153 million user records stolen, including credit card information. So these, ladies and gentlemen, are few of the biggest data breaches for the 21st century. And that is the reason why we're discussing this topic today. So let's take a quick glance at functional versus non-functional requirements. Okay. So the objective of both these ones are basically from functional aspect. It describes what a product does versus a non-functional aspect will describe how the product works. In terms of the end result seen by both these areas, functional is more focused on features, whereas the non-functional aspects are more focused on the quality properties of the solution. And the focus is mainly on user requirements for functional areas and user expectations in terms of non-functional areas. And in essentiality, both functionality is mandatory, whereas you actually will not be having a system without the functional requirements. But non-functional requirements can be termed mandatory, but are an absolute expectation from a user's perspective. Okay. So these are some of the types which are generally considered when we are talking about non-functional requirements. Okay. So let's move on to the first category to give an idea on what exactly is entailed by all these non-functional requirements. Usability. So like the term says, usability is mainly the aesthetic aspects of a user interface. Okay, but unlike saying things like it should be user-friendly, it should be easy to use, there are actually some factors that we need to consider when we're actually talking about usability. So one is the ease of learning. That is how easy is the application for a first-time user to learn and start using. Task efficiency. That is for a frequent user, how efficiently can they perform their activities on the application. Ease of remembering. For a user who is, say, an infrequent user who is returning to the application after some time, how easy is it for them to remember how to use the application once again? Understandability. How easy is it for the user to understand your application? And of course, how satisfied the user is in terms of understanding and using your application. Okay, so let's take a look at some use cases which would actually help us understand how we can apply usability aspects. ATM withdrawal. Okay, so looking at usability aspect, these are two scenarios which we can actually capture in terms of usability. Okay, so it's about identifying who are your different user groups and how you can actually test whether they are finding it easy to use your application. Okay, so if you look at these two examples, you will see that these are target driven, where it's actually testable. So the first scenario, like it indicates, customers with ATM experience from other banks should be able to withdraw within an average of 1 minute, versus customers without previous ATM experience. In their first attempt, 90% of them should be able to withdraw a preset amount of cash within 2 minutes. So here you're ensuring that you're identifying your user segments and you're actually defining testable criteria. Okay, let's look at a self-care application. Okay, so a self-care application is necessarily something which is easy to use, simple to use, because it's something that you would go on to very frequently to do your certain day-to-day activations, customizations that you might want. So you would want to ensure that these are actually very easy to use type of applications. Okay, so the number of components that you would include in a landing page, you might want to consider, because it should not be cluttered. It should not be difficult to load, but very easy to understand as well. So let's look at another case study like airline ticketing. Okay. So airline ticketing, e-ticketing, if you're a first-time user, it can, unlike some of the other applications like self-care applications, e-ticketing has little bit more information processing, like finding multiple routes, your preferred timing, seating, all these things, right? So it should be easy to learn. It should be easy to remember for the infrequent traveler, okay? And it should be task efficient, okay, for the frequent traveler, where they will want to basically able to perform the activations, your e-ticketing easily. And also there are certain aspects when it comes to something like an airline e-ticketing, it should also be suitable for differently abled persons, so that you are not limiting your user group, but you're expanding it to include all types of users who might have the requirement of accessing e-ticketing services. Okay, so this is looking at some of the usability aspects that we need to consider. Let's look at performance. How quickly does the system respond to a user's action? Okay, so let's revisit our ATM withdrawal case. Okay, so here in terms of performance, some of the things that we would want to look at is certain things like transaction processing. Okay, how long does a transaction take? Understanding your volumes, your peak, off-peak volumes, including what times. So for example, if you look at this, you would see certain things like 100%, 100,000 worth of transactions might be supported, will require to be supported during off-peak times, and further 200,000 worth of transactions during peak times. So likewise, you need to understand what type of volumes would come in and identify how these volumes can be catered through your system. So let's look at a case of performance gone wrong. So if you take the self-care, okay, we'll assume this is a overseas implementation, okay, where initially understanding the importance of performance requirements, previous available analytical data was identified, and a volume of 70 TPS was anticipated as being sufficient to cater to the initial launch of a revamped application, right? But what happened is, initially, the volumes actually picked up to almost double or triple the expected volumes, and actually the system crashed, not being able to cater to any of these custom requests coming in. So the end result of it was that the application actually had to be redesigned to be able to cater to these large volumes, right? So this is one aspect of performance gone wrong, where actually the root cause behind something like this can be that maybe that initial value of 70 TPS was not actually identified correctly, but it was actually maybe misunderstood in terms of not understanding the actually volumes which can be expected onto your maybe a new application with all the new additional promotional activities that were going on. So this is one point which we can actually look at how we can improve in terms of ensuring we capture the correct performance volumes. In terms of airline ticketing, global volumes. This is something that is really required in terms of understanding what type of volumes should an airline e-ticketing type of system cater. So unlike some of the other applications, users of an e-ticketing system might never sleep, because when one side of the globe is sleeping, the other side of the globe is working, right? So there are certain aspects that need to be covered in terms of understanding the seasonal aspects, right? So for example, every region might have their own seasonal peak off-peak times, understanding that those particular regional volumes need to get catered. Plus there might be globally as acceptable ones for global events, like maybe shopping festivals in certain countries, where you might get travelers coming from all over the globe to a particular location. So these also need to get catered in order to ensure that the system is actually working correctly. So let's move on to the next one, which is reliability and availability. So reliability is basically specifying about how a system will run without a failure for a given period. Okay. So in the case of something like an e-ticket solution, 99% 99, or it can even go up to 4 nines in terms of 5 nines in terms of reliability, because if there is a downtime on a system like e-ticketing, depending on the per minute volumes of that particular airline, the loss can be immense, which will actually result in a huge revenue loss for the particular company involved. So this is something which is really important in terms of understanding, ensuring that your system is reliable. So another thing which goes hand in hand with reliability is availability. So that is the degree to which a system is accessible when a customer wants to use the application, right? So in the case of ATM withdrawals, just imagine that you're a user standing outside of an ATM trying to withdraw, and you realize that the system is not working. Okay, so you might be a user who has traveled quite a bit of space, especially for cash withdrawal, and the ATM is not working. So that is not a user experience that your clients or whoever who is dealing with that system would want their end users to experience. So something like this is a very important aspect that we need to make sure that we cover in any solution that we do cater. Maintainability and portability. Maintainability is basically defining the time required for a solution or its component to be fixed, right? So in terms of something like e-ticketing, sometimes maintenance windows might not, these type of systems might not have the luxury of actually having maintenance windows. So we need to understand how we can actually cater these type of things. Because unlike any other system, these type of systems can't afford to actually be down. So there has to be alternative mechanisms worked around into your solution on how you can do your maintenance work. Portability. So portability is basically the ease in which a solution can be transferred from one environment to another. Okay, so in the case of a self-care application, if a user is using the app on one phone and they purchase a new phone and they download it onto that, regardless of what OS or what other applications might be running on the phone, the app should be able to work as well and as efficiently as it was working on the previous phone as well. Okay, so that's in terms of portability. So compatibility, extensibility, and scalability. So let's look at compatibility. So compatibility is the degree to which a solution operates effectively with the other components in its environment. Okay. So in the case of something like the self-care app, something that we need to really consider is backward-forward compatibility, right? So regardless of what OS version whatever device, the mobile device might have, the app should be able to cater to at least certain versions backwards, so that there will not be a user base who is unable to use the application due to having an older mobile phone. Something to really be concerned about. Extensibility, the ability of a solution to incorporate new functionality. So in the case of something like ATM withdrawal, so this is the ability of the system to be able to accommodate any type of new roadmap item which might be relevant without having to completely redesign the system. So at the point of designing the system to ensure that your system stands up to a certain expectation, the design needs to cater extensibility in terms of new functionality being added on. Scalability. So scalability is the degree to which the solution is able to handle increased volumes. So in something like e-ticketing, initially when a solution like e-ticketing got introduced maybe 5-10 years ago, the volumes which of users coming onto such a platform would be very much less than it is nowadays, right? So back then when the systems were being developed, basically the system should be scalable to ensure that any volumes for 4-5 years forward can be catered through airline ticketing. So it's very important to get an idea on how your customer growth, customer volumes will be in a couple of years' time. Localization and compliance, another two very important aspects. So localization is about adapting a solution to the local context. Okay, so this is something like in the case of a self-care app, say you're having application in one country and you are doing a similar implementation in a different country, you would actually want to see about certain things like local languages, local color themes, because a color theme which is termed soothing and maybe appropriate in one country might not be in the other country. So these are small details which would help in actually understanding the customer's requirement and the take up that the product will have after launch. In terms of compliance, so compliance is all about regulatory, finance, or any these type of context regarding policies which need to get applied. Okay, so it's about understanding what is your regulatory requirement for your solution. Okay, so it's in the case of airline e-ticketing, there might be certain aspects where I think at one given time, basically there was a requirement from a regulatory point of view that these applications needed to support differently abled persons as well. So since it was a regulatory requirement, it needed to be put in. Okay, so it's not optional, it's a mandatory requirement. So likewise, when you're looking at compliance related ones, so it can be any type of a legal requirement, or it can be even a company's policy documents. You need to understand the objective behind why these applications or these these policies are in place, so that you will actually better understand what type of security requirements or other requirements need to get catered to. Okay, so with that, we are moving to basically one of the most important requirements in terms of non-functional requirements, the security aspect. So this is all about how you protect your application from accidental or malicious access of any functionality or information within the system. Okay, so when it comes to security, there are certain aspects that are really important to look at. Okay, starting off with who would want to harm your company. Okay, so it's about understanding all the intentional and unintentional threats or adversaries who would want to access the or harm your system. Okay, it's about understanding who you need to protect your system against from. Okay, so then the other aspect is what does the app do? Okay, so this is about exploring ways that you might abuse this function, and it's about knowing and understanding what might actually attract hackers, what type of information your system might hold to attract hackers. So that would really help you understand how much of a risk level your information is. Okay, then when it comes to when should users access the application? So understanding your users' habits, okay, understanding generally when they will be accessing the application. Okay, so if it's something like, say, a normal office type of application where your users might be accessing from, say, 8 in the morning to 6 in the night evening, you might actually want to put in certain monitoring mechanisms where if there is activity on the application outside of those hours, you can have a look at and monitor those activities to ensure whether there is any type of unauthorized access trying to take place. Okay, and where aspect of where are the users located. Okay, so if it's a system where we know that generally the users will be in Sri Lanka and India region roughly. Okay, and you find that there's activity coming from, say, a European region, US likewise, then you would know that these are certain things that we need to look at. So these are aspects that we need to ensure that that we do pay attention to and that we are aware of. Okay, and also the aspect of why does the application include this particular feature. Okay, so when it comes to features, don't over deliver or over design, because the more features that are getting added on, that means the system is more complex, and more complex applications are more difficult to secure. Okay, so something to be aware of and to consider. And the last aspect, how might an attacker exploit the app? Okay, so this is about understanding what type of misuse or abuse cases might occur. Okay, so understanding that and testing the application around that will also help in terms of understanding how to protect your application. Right. So data privacy. Okay. Security versus privacy. Okay. So the goal of security is basically making sure that your application is kept safe. Okay. Whereas in terms of privacy, it's about empowering users to determine how much of their personal data they would actually like to share with other parties. It's about giving them the choice. Right. So PII, personally identifiable information, is generally the type of information which will have privacy related concerns. So privacy controls are controls which actually need to be considered when you're looking at your application. Okay, and data anonymization. This is something, a type of a privacy control that you can consider in your applications, where you actually change certain elements in your data set, which actually makes a user anonymous. Okay, so that way, even if there is certain security breaches, you are not compromising the privacy of a particular customer. Okay, and then next thing is about getting user consent. Okay, ensuring that the user knows how their data is used. Okay, and getting their buy-in and consent to use that data for that particular purpose. Disposition. So this is about requesting a particular user being able to request for certain the data to be disposed of. Okay, so if they don't want their data being retained in the system, then they have the right to actually request to remove it. So these are certain privacy controls that when we are doing our systems, we need to ensure that we look at. Okay, breach notifications. So breach notifications, so data breaches are things that no matter how much you try, your application might be at risk, right? There might be hackers who gain access to your information or your customer data. Okay, so in a case like that, if you follow the policies, regulations that are defined in terms of notifying data customers that there was a data breach, in terms of notifying and the timeline and how you notify these. So when it comes to certain times, when you have to pay out fines for the loss of data, at least it will be considered that you have followed the required regulations. Okay, so point to see how you can react in terms that there is some sort of a data breach. Data storage. Okay, So data storage these days take up a completely different thing in terms of multinational boundaries, right? So in today's world, when we have so many methods of accessing data, storing data, processing data, this is something that we need to really look at, okay? So when it comes to the collection point of view, okay, the user might be in the base country, might be traveling across borders. Likewise, they might be collecting, your app might be collecting data at that point. And also when it comes to processing, you might be temporarily processing the data in one place and permanently storing your data in a different place, okay? So like this, you all need to be very careful in how this data storage is handled. So for example, if you're promising your customers that your data will not be accessed by any government party or likewise, okay, but you store your data in a country or a location where that data where that particular government might be able to access that data at any given time. Okay, so then you're actually going against what you're promising your customer. Okay, so these are points that we need to be careful in terms of our data storage. And then data definitely has a life cycle, okay? Generation, retention, and disposal, okay? So, so for every stage of this data life cycle, there are different ways in how we can actually, secure your data. Okay, so generation is basically how you generate it. Retention is understanding how you're going to store your data, how long you're going to keep your data, and how you're going to protect your data. And disposal is about how you're going to remove your data from the system when you're ready to do so. Okay, so disposing of data can actually be a cost saving, because in terms of storage, it reduces the required storage, and also it reduces the risk in terms of if you're not holding unnecessary data, in case of a data breach, you're that much safe in not exposing that data set. Okay, so another very important point to consider. And at the end, you need to really validate your requirement. Okay, so this is something where we might use misuse and abuse cases, right? So in terms of that, these are ways in terms of where you think like a hacker, right? So at this point, think like a hacker, think how you might break your system or misuse it or access data in an unauthorized manner, so that you will be able to prevent another person from accidentally or intentionally accessing your data. Okay, so these were all areas that I touched in terms of understanding what the non-functional requirements are and how they might get applied practically. So I'd like to hand this session over to Masit, my colleague, so that he can walk you through some fintech related areas in terms of a case study. Right. Masit, over to you.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity, first of all. Thank you, Nirushi. It's a vast area that Nirushi has covered. What I'm trying to do is get some deep dive into fintech related NFRs, mostly on the security aspect, and get some information with some learnings and experience that we have gone through developing these fintech applications. So fintech is a predominant buzzword these days. I mean, for anything and everything related to financial technologies, it's commonly used as fintech products, fintech solutions, fintech applications, fintech platforms. You might have come across all these terminologies, and it's growing very fast. And there are a lot of areas that getting emerging in the software industry. So I think just to give you an overview, what can be a fintech product, or what's the overview kind of thing. So there are from lending to mortgage to money transfers for cross-border transactions, wealth management, capital markets, insurance, some call insurtech as well as a subdomain, but predominantly belongs to fintech products as well. And then payments, even personal financing is very important on the customer stickiness and bringing customers into certain portfolios. If you have heard about PFMs and RegTech, again regulatory related audit related technologies that helping out to bring technology to minimize and give a better experience and fast processing, all these benefits that a tech can bring in. And blockchain, I think, again, being part of fintech, it's, I think, overtaking fintech these days. You might have heard about crypto, the grooming of crypto and acceptance of bitcoins these days. Even the locals, there are a lot of news. So this is where fintech is. So you can see it's fintech itself is a vast area, vast coverage of portfolios, product lines, and even kind of service areas. So security, when it comes to financials, when it comes to anything related to your money, I think security is one of the highest rated non-functional requirement. Everyone has to be focused, unfortunately, until very recent, where there are a lot of breaches and money loss incident happen. People have not really focused on that area. So why it's very important to get security on, you put your attention on security on fintechs. So these are some data stats. 71% of data breaches are financially motivated stuff. So it's given that someone is getting into data breaches, coming in, hacking into some information is to get the financial benefit, either to get that work done or to get the financial benefit from the information that he is breaching out. So financial information is very, very valuable data. Data itself is valuable in this fourth, I mean, in this industry, fourth revolution on the industry. But I think on top of that, financial data is rated the highest valuable data. So it's very important to secure that piece. And the cost, if a cyber attack or any kind of a attack or breach happens on financial data or systems, cost a lot. I think the reputation cost, the credibility cost, and actual money cost is humongous. And there are a lot of cases. I think Nilushi itself brought out certain examples that we have gone through. So it's one of the reasons. And e-commerce, with the pandemic, with remote, with lockdowns, I think one of the area that has helped us to take our day-to-day life needs. And one of the highest number of breaches is looking at the card data. So they're not worried about the amount, the items sold, to get items to your doorstep without paying. No, not that the case. They are very important about the customer's card details, because that's the highest value data in that particular segment. And in 2017, somewhat all data, this is definitely the numbers should have gone up now. Most of the attacks or most of the hacker activities is around financial services, because that's again for hackers and all, that's been the honeypot, that's been the most valuable stuff. So that's why the security on your fintech application or mobile app can be a service, it can be a platform. It's very important to have high security implemented, comes under NFR. I want to take a couple of incidents that happened very recently in Sri Lanka. I think the latest that we had heard is last year's LK domain registry unavailability. I think might have remembered that this services was not available for, I think, couple of hours, almost one day. And the reason being the password breach. It was not treated the level that it should be treated. And another very famous incident, a teenager got into president's official website, where again the reason being the password being not treated as secure as it should be. There were multiple incidents that government websites being attacked. These are might not have uh, come into kind of a actual financial losses, but the reputation loss, the attention, the integrity of these systems are being questioned and being always losing their credibility over these incidents. Again, the reason being the password was not being properly secured and being tightened as it should have been. Mobile banking, there were a couple of incidents which some are not being taken on the mainstream medias, but there were multiple incidents that banking sector has been attacked and been gone through fraudulent transactions. There were multiple reasons for that, but the main reason for transactions to go through was there was no dual authentication over the transactions, and there were no alerts for the transactions on the consumer side. So some of the sites that we have already seen. So for some reason, Sri Lanka in the context, in our country context, we took actions, I guess, very couple of years back. We have taken this as very serious requirements when it comes to system implementation, even in the financial sector. We thought we were secured because there were no incidents happen, but the reality is nobody was interested on these systems until last couple of years. And when they really wanted to get in or break through, it was very easy for them. And that's why I think recently, within the last couple of 3 to 4 years, people are very, very stringent on their security requirements, especially on the financial sector. So I want to bring some focus areas, some of the areas that we have already put our step on. Some we have learned over failures, some we learned over regulatory requirements, some we had to do on certain elements. And I want to share that with you. What are the areas that you need to put focus? What are the kind of elements that you need to pay attention when specialized, especially I think it's not limited to fintech, but if you ever you are using a financial related application, payment related application, I think it's a must to focus on these particular areas. I think Niloshi has again talked a lot on PII data, personal identification information. I think this is more or less data breaching related focus, where you need to first thing you need to encrypt. You have to make sure that the data that you collected are insecure and in a proper guided manner. And there's another very recent kind of a regulatory, not from the local authorities or anything, from even from, if you go to App Store or even Google, those are the mobile application giants that we have to liaise with if we're doing a mobile app. There's a consent, a strong consent that we have to acquire from the customer if ever we are collecting information from them. So I think the apps are getting rejected, apps are getting pulled down from the markets if you are not following these rules. I think iOS is very particular about this, and even the Google now on the Play Store is actively requesting all the applications to collect this information with proper customer consent. That's obviously with a digital consent. So one focus area, we cannot simply collect information. If ever we are getting those the PII related information from the customers, we definitely have to get the consent of storing those information. Multi-factor is, I think, rapidly getting involved on every other system now. It's not only for financial systems definitely is a must. And I think it's even now, if you go to your Office 360 and if you log into your any other non-functional, even your HRIS today, might have secured with multi-factor authentication, which is really, really required these days, because username and password is not at all sufficient and not secure enough in current context of the powerful tools that can use by the hackers, and even the processing that current even a single machine can have. So it's very important to have multi-factor authentication where you use multiple channels, minimum 2, to get a transaction or authentication succeed. You definitely require minimum 2 channels to authenticate yourself. Device binding. I think even in Sri Lanka, the number of devices is higher than the population of the country. We do have around 20 million of population, where the devices, mobile devices, is surpass 24 million as of last year, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a high possibility that you do have multiple devices with you, where you're trying to access on multiple channels on your same account. If you're ever doing that, ever allowing that, it's very important your application is handling this situation where you allow only a single device to be access your information and concurrently. I think this is the easiest way is device binding, where if you're using one device, if another device comes on the same account, either to log off from the first device, or you notify the customer on your second device that one device is already being used, you need to log off or somewhat. So the handling of how it's been implemented is purely to the business, I mean, requirement of your application. But the thumb rule is have this device binding available in your application, where you are not you handle it properly when it comes to multiple devices. Data encryption is from the inception one of the security aspects, I think, that we have focused on. I think before these security things erupted this level, but it's still fundamentals and still something that we really need to focus on. This encryption of sensitive and information that is important is really, really a fundamental and critical requirement. I think having a password is one thing, and then the authentication policies. I think when you have your username and password, and even with multi-factor authentication, it's very important that suspicious logins to be treated as suspicious, and even the complexity to be maintained on your password, and even if you're trying on multiple failure attempts, the account to be safely logged in, and you make sure that it's the same person, and you take a password reset option where you take a third information or fourth information to make sure that the same person, the right person of the account is trying to access this. So I think if you've gone through Google password account policy, it's very stringent, and I think it's very, I would say, nicely being implemented. Sometimes it's annoying, but I think the security is number one for them. So it's important to have such. I think authentication, there were time that we allowed offline authentication for transactions where we are strictly omitting with the current day, modern day applications. We always want to have this authentication to be validated from the what do you call a backend that is authorized to get that work done because of the fraudulent devices or the front ends that attacker or maybe a person that trying to be pretend as another person. So it's very important not to allow offline authentications. And there was time that transactions to be make it offline, and then when the system comes online to be authenticated. There can be situations that you can allow that when you are in the trusted user set of users, but I don't think for the consumer market offline transactions is encouraged anymore. One of the critical area, we all use credit cards, I guess, in our generation. We all use credit or card payments to be enabled on our cards. All our cards are default in these days enabled for online payments due to the pandemic. That the enablement has been even enforced by banks. So it's very, very important that when you are entering your information, you collect you data on rest, data on transit, and even data on any other mode to be very, very secure and treated as very sensitive information. Card details is one of the highest, or rather the highest, paid attention from the hackers, where you can easily get your card information tracked down if you are not treated it's into the proper way of security handling. So PCI DSS, if you have heard, is a kind of a framework to secure your card details if ever you are collecting. It is a very stringent process, and there are a lot of implementation that you need from your application side, infrastructure side, even the network and hardware implementations. So I think if ever you need to collect your information, the card information especially, you have to get certified by these kind of implementations that you make sure you treat your card from your customers or your clients the way that it should have been treated. And even the 3DS, if you have seen today's most of the cards that enable for online payments are 3DS verified. So 3DS is basically, it's similar to two-factor authentication in login. When you're doing a transaction over a merchant or in an e-commerce website, if you enter your card details, you will be challenged with OTP, one-time password, where you need to provide that as well as your secondary authentication to make a transaction through. So a stolen card anymore is no longer usable for anyone, or even the card numbers being breached. So there's a secondary gate that person cannot be use this information for any other other stuff, payment without knowing the OTP. And yes, we have already talked about storing all this information in a secure manner. Session handling, again, related to our device binding scenario, somewhat. It's interconnected. So when you're doing your sessions, all these, we are in a world that our the mobile device is in as a once it's kind of no longer going to be connected, always connected. It's connected by APIs. So you have an application runs on your client's mobile, and you do have a backend that supports that application, and you are connected via APIs. So session is the authentication section, is tokens. Authentication tokens are the elements that are getting validated via each request. We are not logging every time that we do activity. We log once, do multiple activities, that all the activities that you are doing behind is authenticated via the login that you have done first. So it's very important that the session that you logged in properly is being treated very sensitively, and make sure once you are done with that, no longer that session being alive or being available for another person to be used for any fraudulent or any third party activity. This is something I think most of the developers or even the QAs in quality assurance engineers, if there are any, are not put very high attention, which is really, really critical when it comes to system implementation, whether we are logging the errors in right method and what information being collected in the errors and how much information that we are exposing. So it's a two-sided thing. You can collect anything and everything related to a transaction and put it to a logs. It's very easy for you to debug and it's very easy for you to understand what happened. But if you are taking off the sensitive information into your error logs or the logs that you are creating in, that is one of the areas that the data breaches can happen. So it's very important your logs being secure, and even it should be definitely meaningful for you to do your debugging activities and finding out errors, but at the same time it should not be having the sensitive information like card details or even the tokens that we use, secure tokens, should not have in the appear in the logs. If these logs been shared with someone, it will be very easy for them to get these sensitive information via logs. They don't really have to go into your database level, third or fourth level export. Data backup is, I think, standard, something that we are focusing for any other activity. The recovery point would be backup. So definitely a daily backup, the incremental backup is the recommended way of handling financial data. You cannot simply say your customers, our system crash and we don't know how much money you have in your account, or we don't know what's the last transaction that you made. So it's very, very, very important. Every activity done by a customer or client is being recorded and saved with us in case any situation that we lost their data. There should be minimum D-1 data available with you. I think this is being treated in regulatory guidelines as well. This again, transaction logs, somewhat similar to the error logs what we have discussed. Transaction logs are advised to be transferred to a secure location, not to the application that we do run our application. So always recommended and advised to transfer this information to a secure location, where that location is pretty much locked down, controlled servers where only certain or one or two or very, very necessary people only being accessible. So that's one on the backend implementation. And we do have in the mobile side, we do have crash logs collected. And it's very important once you collected those information to be flushed from these devices, because this information can be reused through re-engineering the logics to be identified, or these tools and the methodologies these days are extremely powerful. If you expose a lot of information and logics, that can be lead into re-engineering, and someone can maliciously add more information to the or they can really understand what you are doing inside your mobile app and crack that log and get it the way that they wanted. Access control matrix is basically, we do get a lot of complaints on the access matrix. This is something very least attention again from any administrative people that we have worked on. We should always give the least access to the people, and it's if necessary only that access has to be given. There shouldn't be any open access to everybody that worked on, including the developers. So access control is extremely important in your infrastructure implementations. So we are kind of right now getting into these compliance and guidelines. A couple of years back, Sri Lanka did not really had these things documented and brought as laws, where now we see these actions has been taken because of the incidents, and even uh, globally these things has been treated as very, very important activities for a central bank of a local authority. So we do have MBSS guidelines. If you're ever using a mobile payment application in your organization, nowadays it's a mandate to go through these minimum guidelines, compliance standards. There are around 28 areas that you need to put focus on, very detailed, descriptive areas. And I think very few apps in Sri Lanka still certified those everything with all these requirements. But I think their central bank is very stringent, bringing every app into these standards where it secure a lot of the fault is, and it gives a lot of security onto your payments, and make sure that your money is safe. And NIST is another kind of hardware related implementations, how you should use the information security on your hardware's infrastructure level. That itself is governed by CERT CC, and that's again been documented, and some it's been pushed down to followed. Data protection bill, it's not yet available, but it's been discussed, and I think a very recent future, it will come into the picture where we might need to get adhere to this. So it's very important, if you're building a new system, get used to these data protection bills and guidelines, so that you, once your system is gone live, you don't have to really worry much, because it's very, very painful, and it's very difficult to bring a system already running into compliance, because there are a lot of areas, and sometimes you might need to touch 60 to 70% of the system to get shapen up into these guidelines. But if you can make it at the first step, it will be very easy on your in the future, when these things are available in the market. I mean, forced to you, you might not need to do a lot of tweaks or a lot of implementations. GDPR is, if ever you are working with European level data or any other such integrators, you have to comply to this, again related to privacy data related implementations, and something that you might need to focus if ever your application or the product or integrators even being part of this particular region of the world. I want to quickly take 1 minute, and I think I'm past the 30 minutes time. I think this is very important for any mobile developers. If you are in the audience, there are a lot of attention being put onto these 11 items. If ever you are building a payment application or any financial related, not too limited that, but if ever doing that, I think it's a must to have these implementations ready with you. The routed or jailbroken device should be identified in your application, and should not allow to access your information. So as soon as you see a routed jailbroken device, you should be blocking the application running on those devices. Untrusted devices is similar to that. You should not allow, if the device chip or even those implementers are not identified enough, you should not allow them to use your application, because those can be fraudulent, and simply trying to use your application to gather data or re-engineer your logics and get some sensitive information out of it. Installation errors, I think, has to be very generic. You should not expose exact reasons and the more technical information to the front line. It should be very kind of masked information. We should not really give more details, because these details can lead the attackers or any other hackers to get into your logics and get into your application architecture and implementation points. Force update is something that we missed out most of the times. Remember, when you're pushing out a mobile app into Play Store or iOS application store, you are throwing out something to out of your control, but you are connected via APIs only. So once this, if ever you want to bring these versions, and definitely that's not going to be your final version of this application, you will have multiple versions coming in, scattered behind and in the future. You have to have a control to have a window of your applications rolling out. So you release version 1.0. Next month, you assume that you are releasing 2.0. Third month, your application releasing 3.0. That's the recommended versions, number of versions in the market to be limited to 3. When it comes to the 4th version, probably you might need to bring all your users who are using version number 1 to version number 2. So it's make it as a running window where you have your control over minimum of versions of your applications, and those applications obviously can be backward compatible, but you have to have a control of your application versions and bring customers to a version as a minimum version. Otherwise, in future, if you have multiple versions and your application users are not going to update your application, which is in the case in Asian countries, they don't really put attention to update their applications. They might have forcefully stopped that feature. So you will in a trouble. You will have people who are in version 1.0, which you cannot migrate it to a later version. So very important to have that force update implementation with you. Emulator debugging, I think again related to security, you should not allow that. Basically for the people who are not mobile developers, basically you plug your mobile device into emulator. You can run your application on emulator where you can get a lot of information, debug information on the emulator. So you should not allow that APK to be run on emulator and debugging devices. Minimum OS is again something that we go hands on hands with the force update. Just like our application is getting updated, the OS is getting updated daily. I mean, every month there is update, and every year there's a major upgrade comes in. So we have to have a control in which versions of OS, both Android and iOS, my application should run, because the deprecated versions of OSs can have a lot of vulnerabilities, and even Google and Apple is not supporting those vulnerabilities. So there's a high possibility that your application is in risk in the older versions, because those are deprecated versions and you more vulnerable on those OSs. So you have to have a control that your application is run minimum on agreed OS and top only. Device binding, I think we have discussed. You should always have a device binding when you have multiple devices. You are allowing multiple devices. Network failure, something that we are really not putting in attention. Not like you are browsing Facebook, you lost your network and you missed the last 2 comments of your friend's photo. It's not like that when it comes to financial transaction. If you lose in the middle, the network in the middle of a transaction, you have to properly handle that, because there can be inconsistencies between the message or the final state that we passing it to the customers as of our backend. So it has to be very, very consistent. You have to handle that network failure in middle. If you missed out something, you have to be very, very crucial and pay attention how you manage your transaction on a persistent state. I think we talked about taking the consent. It's been forced. You can see if you go on iOS store, if you go into Apple even, Android even, you are being forced to get these consents, and if you're not, you are being pulled out from the markets, and new webs are not allowed to be published into the markets. System maintenance again is very important. It should not be limited to when your system is down only. When your system is unstable, when you have an issue in your backend or connectivity or network, anything related, you should be able to block your customers coming to your application. This is the reason for system maintenance. It's not going to be anything like nice to have when you're down, when your system is not working, to inform your customer that it's not available. It's not that. It's very important that we stop your traffic coming in if your backend is not stable, especially on the financial transactions, because of the inconsistency that you can cater in a situation where your backend or your application is not stable. So it's very important the system maintenance to be there to block your traffic in case of system maintenance, in genuine case, or in case of a issue that you are going through. Session timeouts, we were discussed, it has to be time bound, it has to be activity bound. If ever your activities are done and the customer is not logging out, you have to have a time bomb timeouts for the sessions, so that your authenticated the sessions are being secured for not to use for any fraudulent activities. Yep, that's it. It might be taken as non-functional requirements if you are BS. It might be at the latter part of your FRS. If you are QA, it might be your last piece of test cases to be tested. If you're a developer, might be the not even looking at this area of the FRS because it treated this as nice to have an additional workload or kind of overhead to the business requirements. It's no longer the case on fintech, and I think it's been replicated in every other industry as well. Non-functional requirements are very, very important stuff that we need to focus on every pillar, from the requirement gathering, from the development to the verification level. And we never should neglect anymore the NFRs. That's I think it's going to be a thumb rule moving forward. With that, I'm done. Any questions or anything? I think we can spend a couple of minutes, and if not, yeah, can wind up.
Thank you, Masit, for that informative session. I think our audience has learned a lot about non-functional requirements in fintech implementation. So we have come to the end of the session. Thank you, everyone, and have a pleasant evening.